Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Tackling the Food Waste Funding Gap, Financing Food Waste Prevention to Combat Climate Change. This webinar has been brought to you by the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, the Go4 SDGs, the Platform for Green Growth and Global Goals, P4G, and RAB. And my name is Richard Swannell, and I'm the International Director at RAB, and I will moderate the day and also give one of the presentations. Today is all about how we can finance the halving of food waste around the world. We discuss why to tackle food waste, the benefit it can bring in terms of cost savings and as a climate mitigation strategy, and we examine how to leverage existing financial mechanisms to deliver national food waste prevention strategies. And we have a truly excellent lineup today. We have Adriana Zacarias from UNEP to kick us off. I will give a short presentation on the case for change. Then we have Cruz from the Platform for Green Growth and Global Goals, and then Geeta Sethi from the World Bank, Rita Schuster from the NAMA facility, and Fong from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And at the end of their presentations, each one will give a presentation for about 10 minutes. I'll bring everybody together for a Q&A. And please, can I ask you to add your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And we will then get to those questions at the end of the session. We've allowed plenty of time for questions at the end. So I really do hope you thoroughly enjoy the day and hopefully get a great deal out of it, working out how we might finance effective ways of delivering halving food waste by 2030. So to kick us off, it's my pleasure to actually welcome Adriana Zacarias from the United Nations Environment Programme to give the first presentation. Adriana is a graduate from Cambridge in the UK and with a Master's in Environment and Development, a BSc on Political Science from ITAM in Mexico. Adriana is an international expert on sustainable development, resource efficiency, and sustainable consumption and production. Adriana is currently the head of global coordinator of UNEP's initiative, Global Opportunities for Sustainable Development Goals, or Go4 SDGs. I love that acronym. She supports policies, strategies, and initiatives related to the green economy, circular economy, innovation for SMEs, sustainable lifestyles, and other themes. And Go4 SDGs accelerates regional solutions for inclusive green economies and circularities, and works in 3 areas: policy coherence, SME innovation, and youth empowerment. Adriana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this introduction. Thanks for the presentation. It's a pleasure to be here today with you with this excellent panel. Oh, sorry. I'm very happy to be here today. A few weeks ago, we were in the Food System Summit discussing the importance and the challenges that we have ahead to make the food system more sustainable. And as a follow-up, that's why we are here. I think as Richard well said, we want to highlight first, why is food waste important? How can we accelerate action? And most importantly also, what are the innovative and the new financial institutions out there that can support governments and other institutions, stakeholders in taking action in reducing food waste. So it's wonderful to be here. I want to set up the scene a little on the importance, as I mentioned, the importance of food waste. As also Richard mentioned, Go4 SDGs is about scaling up the implementation of the SDGs and action. And the first thing really to say, why is this important, is, as we always say in UNEP, we are facing 3 planetary crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, and increasing levels of pollution. And when we think about any of these 3 things, agriculture and food systems come as a key priority and a key sector where really we need to interfere, we need to work if we want to solve this planetary crisis. You all might be familiar to the footprint, the impacts that agriculture has in our systems. It's very well known that agriculture and food production uses 70% of the fresh water, is using 50% of the habitable land, is responsible for a big share of the CO2 emissions and the greenhouse emissions, 1/4 of the emissions, for example, and not to say the impact of biodiversity. We know that 70 to 80% of the biodiversity loss is related to the food production. And I didn't add here also the impacts of pollution on the soil, water, land. We know the nitrification of lakes or the oceans and all that, the pollution of agriculture. So the challenge is big. Now, based on study of the World Resources Institute, we also see that if we want to meet the Paris agreements, agriculture needs to reduce by 70% the CO2 emissions. So that's a big one. And the other challenge we have, if we need to feed 10 billion people by 2050, we need to increase the food production, right? But if we want to maintain in the limits or keep sustainable lifestyles, we cannot increase the land use for agriculture. So we need to be more efficient. And this all is telling us we need to really rethink our systems of production of food and consumption of food. Impacts on climate change are very clear. I don't want to go into details here. We know that the temperature is increasing, the temperature in the land is increasing already by 1.5, and this has huge impacts in production, huge impacts in the desertification, in the degradation of soil. So what I want to highlight here is that, okay, we have, as I mentioned, the challenge of how to make our production systems of food more efficient, with at the same time we know the threats of climate change is put in there. And what I want to say here is we cannot afford anymore in wasting food. We cannot continue in these systems where the food is being lost and waste. And we know that this is about 1/3 of the food production. And as I mentioned, the environmental impacts are huge, as well as the economic losses that we have here. The food loss and food waste is calculated as 1 trillion per year, which is huge. And how can we allow this in a world where we are facing economic crisis and in a world where we have a big share of population that simply have not access to food or are malnourished? So this is the logic thing that we need to really fit. Now, with this, just to say, this is the challenge ahead. What are we doing? And talking about climate change, we see that food loss and food waste has contributes to 8% of the greenhouse emissions or the CO2 emissions, so has a potential in increasing the climate ambition. But sadly, only 11 countries in the world have included food loss in their NDCs, and none of them have included food waste. Why is this happening? Why is this happening if really this is like a long-hanging fruit where countries can take action quickly in reducing food waste? So to respond to this, UNEP together with WWF had launched last year a report on how to enhance NDCs in the food systems, and there are good recommendations for countries on how to do that. I will invite you to have a look to that paper. The other thing is, as I mentioned, food loss and food waste has a good contribution to climate change, but also to all the SDGs, as you can see in the graphic, it has direct impact in more than only the SDG 12.3, 12 and the target 12.3. In the current context with COVID, for example, where we know and we saw the disruption of food production and the increases of poverty and hunger, of course, reducing food waste can help to contribute and will contribute to SDG 1 and 2 to reduce poverty and hunger. You all know that, of course, is directly linked to the SDG 12 on halving the food waste, but also important for land and also life on land and also on water. So that's the importance of this. And again, how can we accelerate this? How can we have those benefits? One part, just responding to the SDG 12, and in particular the target 12.3. Here is where UNEP together with FAO have been working together. We are the custodians of the different indicators. FAO is looking in particular to the part of the supply, food loss, and UNEP is the custodian of the indicator that is looking at food waste. And in that, we want to help countries in measuring that. We are very pleased to announce that in March this year, we launched the Food Waste Index that provides the methodology to measure this indicator. What is also very important in this report is that with all the data available nowadays, the report calculates the amount of food globally that we are wasting. And it says, as you see, is 17% of the food available at the consumer level is wasted. In the year 2019, almost 1 billion tons of food were thrown away by restaurants, households, retailers. So this is what we want to change. And that's why we are very pleased that now there's this methodology that we want now to roll out. Another key message of this report is also that food waste is not only an issue for developed countries, it's equally or more important also to developed countries. And as you can see here in the graphic, the findings of the report are really, for me, were shocking to see that, for example, the food waste in the lower middle income households or countries is higher than in the high income. So here the key message is this is a global concern and responsibility, and is equally important for both developed and developing countries. Now, good news, and what are we doing to accelerate action? I promise you that we are also going to discuss how to accelerate action. So we are very happy that UNEP, together with GRAP and with the initiative that I'm leading of SDGs, we have set up now 4 regional working groups with different countries and institutions that will be looking at how to measure food and then also how to take action to reduce food waste. We are going to work in 25 countries. We're engaging 68 national partners. And the idea is that during 1 year, we will be developing the capacity at the country level to measure food waste, then also to exchange experiences among countries and best practices, how to move forward on that, and support the countries to develop their national strategies to reduce food, and also to include this in the NDCs. And of course, we want to engage regional partners in this. So any of you listening to that and interested in supporting these efforts is welcome. I'm not going to go in detail. I just want to highlight here the countries that are engaged in these regional groups, and also to say we are not working only with the governments. We are working with think tanks, institutes working in this area. And to close my presentation with a very good news, as a result of the Food System Summit, there is a new coalition that has been launched by UNEP, FAO, the World Resource Institute, GRAP, Robobank, the World Bank, WWF, and many of my colleagues here sharing the panel today. And this is Food is Never Waste. This is a new coalition that will accelerate the implementation of SDG 12.3. And we'll be working not only in measuring that, but in taking action. With this, I want to thank you, and over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Adriana. And I think in the run-up to COP26, which is going to be upon us very, very shortly, that message of getting food loss and waste and the food system generally into the NDCs is a really important one. And I do hope that your words will be resonating through that network at the moment. Thank you very much for setting the scene so beautifully. And now I'm going to just give a presentation myself just to add to that. And what I'd really like to do is just to sort of build on what you've just heard from Adriana and actually try and make it as clear as possible the case for action on food. The benefit is it actually brings in cost savings terms, but also environmental savings and social savings. And I think the critical bit is that link not only to financial savings, but also climate mitigation. And so in the next few minutes, I'm just going to talk a little bit around the food waste and why tackle it, just to re-emphasize that point, and then go into what we know actually works and the challenges going forward. So just to re-emphasize the point that Adriana made, for every 2 tons of food we eat on the planet, another ton is wasted. And I struggle to think of any other sector, the car industry, the electronics sector, which would have accepted wastage rates of this level. 2 tons of food we produce, another ton is wasted. And it's surely something that we absolutely have to tackle. And just to sort of bring it alive a little bit, we need an area the size of China, that's 9.6 million kilometers, to grow the food that is lost or wasted across the food chain every single year. As Adriana said, the costs are huge, over $1 trillion. And just to put that in perspective, that's more than 10 times the turnover of the world's biggest food manufacturer, Nestle. And in environmental terms, as Adriana said, it's 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. And put that into perspective, if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. Absolutely huge. And that is against a backdrop of 1 in 9 people going hungry every night. That's over 800 million people going to bed every night against a backdrop of all that food waste. And what's also interesting is the Project Drawdown have gone through all of the climate mitigation strategies that they can find and looked at the potential for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And interestingly, the #1 most impactful strategy is reducing food waste. So it is the top way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, 91 to 102 gigatons of CO2 potentially reduced between 2020 and 2050. So there's an added incentive. This is a good way of tackling climate change. Well, what's the return on investment like? And this is some research that RAP did with WRI a few years ago now. We looked at 1,200 business sites around the world in 700 different companies and in 17 different countries right around the world. And what we did is we looked at the cost to businesses of acting on food waste reduction, and then the benefits that the businesses receive from that implementation, and looked at the ratio between those. So, and what we found was quite startling. What we found is for each dollar invested, there was a mean return of investment of $7 of financial benefit. So for every $1 invested, they got $7 back. And the repayment time was usually within 90% got their money back within 2 years. And this is an extraordinary finding. What it does say, and this is something that the chief executive, the ex-chief executive of Tesco, Dave Lewis, used to say, is it's a no regrets investment strategy because it will return on investment. Now, just to give you an idea of how that looks broken down by different parts of the supply chain, you'll see that actually the majority got their money back between, got $5 back for every $1 invested. Then the next was between 5 and 10. But there was a big long tail, and that big long tail is because where they got really high returns. This is largely because the interventions were all around training, which were relatively low cost, but actually gave good payback. And this is training in the hospitality and food service sectors, where you changing behaviors in the kitchen can rapidly reduce food waste. But given this very good return on investment, why aren't more businesses doing it? Well, I think there are 2 reasons. One is this one, the true cost of waste. Many businesses, when they look at what they're spending their money on, look at the bills that they pay. And the bills that they pay for food waste is the disposal cost of that food waste. So that's the bill they get coming through every month that they have to pay to take the food and throw away. But the actual cost of that food waste is much, much higher. It's the cost of actually buying the food if you're a restaurant or hospitality, or indeed a retailer, that buying the food, it's the lost materials that's gone into that food, it's the energy costs, it's the labor, it's the packaging, all of those costs together. When you look at those total costs, they're often at least 10 times the disposal costs. And so the true cost of waste is substantially higher than the visible costs of waste. And the other reason why I think this is not being tackled is that most businesses don't know how much food is wasted. They often think, well, they haven't, because they don't measure it, they don't know how to act. And if you don't measure something, you can't act on that purposes. So those 2 things together, I think, explain why people are not taking advantage of the excellent business case for tackling food loss and waste. Now, just to give you an example, this is the just to give a breakdown of food loss and waste across the supply chain for the whole of Europe. And what you see there is that actually households are a massive contributor to food waste. So 53% from farm. If you get 53% of the food lost or wasted across the supply chain is in the household across the whole of the EU, with another 12% in food service and another 5% in wholesale and retail. So this is a very significant component of the problem. And in the UK, actually post-farm gate, 70% of food is wasted in the homes. So tackling food waste, household food waste, is utterly key to delivering SDG 12.3. And as Adriana eloquently said, this is not just a high-income world problem. This is not a rich world problem. This is actually a problem across the world, in upper middle-income countries and lower middle-income. It's a problem for the world to tackle. And what's fascinating is that average per capita wastage in the home is equivalent to the average human body weight on the planet. So we're throwing away the average human body weight of food in our homes across the world every single year. And so clearly there's got to be a key area for our action. And one way to drive change is using behavior change campaigns, such as Love Food, Hate Waste, for example, which helps citizens around the world, actually in multiple countries around the world, to reduce food loss and waste and actually take steps helping citizens buy what they need and eat what they buy, by fundamentally attacking the behaviors that are actually leading to the food waste in the first place. When you look at the impacts of those behavior change campaigns, you find that actually there's some really good results. So the Netherlands has reduced edible food waste in the home by 27%. The UK has reduced edible food waste by 31%, or 1.4 million tons every year. And the ratio of costs of the campaign, which are often picked up by the public sector, to the savings to the citizens can be very high, around $80 to $100 for every dollar invested. So these are programs that can deliver real results, and they can do them pretty rapidly and help us get towards delivering SDG 12.3. And not only does this reduce waste, but it also reduces greenhouse gas emissions and could be a cost-effective way of delivering greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So for example, that reduction in the UK, the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with the food that's no longer wasted would be the same as taking 2 million cars off the road, which is not far off the current sales of cars in the UK every single year. So in conclusion, I think the case for investing in food waste is compelling. From what both Adriana and I have said, I think it's extremely compelling. It saves money, it reduces carbon emissions, and it improves food availability on a planet where that's sorely needed. Return on investment is significant and the benefits substantial. And therefore, I think it is ripe for rapid scale up and investment. Thank you. So having now built the case for investment, I'd now like to introduce Ian de Cruz, the Global Director of P4G, Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals, to sort of talk about how we might scale this up and deliver this at scale across the planet. Ian, over to you. Looking forward to your insights.
Thank you, Richard and RAP and Adriana and UNEP for giving us the opportunity in P4G to be a co-host of this important topic of how we turn food loss and waste into a market-based solution that in time becomes an investable asset. As you can see in this next slide, P4G itself is a partnership of 12 partner countries and 5 partner organizations, including World Resources Institute, and have in our ecosystem of over 140 business partners and 100 civil society partners, including RAP and UNEP. Our partnerships are providing solutions in developing countries in 5 key areas, food and agriculture being one, but also in water, energy, cities, and the circular economy. Our partnerships are focused on these market-based solutions led by developing countries, aligned with their country's development and climate priorities to catalyze action by the private sector and investors. Since our inception in 2018, we've developed a pipeline of more than 50 partnerships, leverage investment of over 290 million, and scaled impact of about 110,000 tons of annual CO2 emissions, and affected over 500,000 people on the ground. For us at P4G, the work being done here on food loss and waste, and we'll talk a little bit about our partnership with RAP and UNEP on Flawless, is really trying to bring countries, investors together to note, based upon developing a pipeline of partnerships that are in their very early stages for high impact but high risk to unlock their investment potential. In this particular case, we're looking to work with UNEP and RAP to turn food waste into a market-based solution that can ultimately become an investable asset, and are working to actively do that in 3 of our P4G countries in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa, who are part of the regional working groups that Adriana mentioned in UNEP. In this next slide, you see the need for market-based solutions in this funding gap, which is a core title and thesis of this session. There's a 2.5 trillion annual gap in sustainable development goal financing in developing countries. We have seen in some of our emerging research, only about 2% of donor development finance is really spent on catalyzing this private sector investment. Development financial institutions tend to invest in this area, but these are quite high risky and early stage investments, and less than 8% of their investments go into these early stage solutions, which we're talking about here. Food systems play a crucial role in actually looking at the net zero solutions. But what we are looking to do, working with our partners, is how to bring the private sector more specifically in advancing market-based solutions that can turn food loss and waste into an asset. As part of this, we're looking at a whole of value chain from farm to fork, at how we can improve the systems together, reduce the waste, and drive income ultimately for smallholder farmers. This is the approach that P4G takes in looking at its food and agricultural pipeline. So in this next slide, you see 3 specific examples of P4G partnerships working across that value chain. And through our partnerships, we're really looking to bridge the gaps and drive efficiency and build resilience across that value chain from farm to fork. And we have 3 examples here to share. The first one is a partnership with RAP and UNEP we call Flawless as a partnership. This is more than about just driving economic growth and profit margins. What we're looking to do here is create a market-based solution that starts with governments acting to put this market or emerging market on the map by setting targets for what food loss and waste can be, by starting to get corporates to voluntarily commit to such action, having people like RAP, World Resources Institute, to measure the actual food loss and waste savings, and getting a critical scale in this context that really drives investors to want to invest in this area. We call this the Target, Measure, Act, and Invest approach. The second partnership here, Plus Plus, is a good example of a crowdfunding platform that allows individual investors in places like the UK and Netherlands to contribute to agribusinesses with small, medium enterprises in countries like Nicaragua, Colombia, Ghana, and Kenya, and Indonesia. It's already secured €500,000 to really provide directly in investments to these small, medium enterprises, and has led to 5,000 farmers receiving a better income and 1,500 farmers already increasing their food production, which is particularly important in these COVID constrained times where it is hard to get funding and investment directly to our developing countries. The last partnership, while not specifically about tackling food waste, is an important model of how we're turning a challenge into an opportunity, which is about food insecurity that exists in Ethiopia, child nutrition issues there, and how a nutritional biscuit, which traditionally has been imported to Ethiopia, can be created by local manufacturers in Ethiopia, increasing the livelihood of smallholder farmers' incomes, creating not only a tasty biscuit, but is more nutritious with protein for children, increasing the nutrition standards in Ethiopia, and with the potential to create a new market, not only within country, but over time, potentially for export. What these 3 partnerships show is the various parts of the value chain, and in P4G, we're trying to systematically link and bring these together. So in this next slide, using Flawless as an example of characteristics of what we see is really important in successful partnerships, the first thing we need to start off with is a solid business model, a case for why this is a solution that ultimately can lead to a win-win solution. And that was outlined by Richard in the report done with World Resources Institute of this is a win-win. This is about unlocking savings for corporates. It's reducing individual household waste, and in a way where it can actually become an investable asset We heard in an earlier session from Rabobank how they have created a specific financial product to be able to do that. They call the SDG 12.3 loan. The second key thing is we need to find those coalition of doers. Who are those entrepreneurs on the ground really driving that investment and action for markets to really scale these models? The third one, and I think we'll hear a little bit from others like Patty and Ruth from Anama facility, is to ensure that these priorities are aligned with national priorities of countries, including their nationally determined contributions and their national sustainable development goal plans. And we all have an opportunity here from people to blend these financial approaches. How do we use development funding? How do we bring the World Banks and Geeta into this, and Ruth and the NAMA facilities and Patty in the foundation space to actually crowd in on these win-win solutions to create this market as quickly as possible, to then really ultimately scale these solutions, which we are looking to do with RAP, with UNEP in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa. So in summary, in this last slide, what can we do together to really deliver this impact and to really address this funding gap? The first thing we say is target for governments to really set food loss and waste targets that can be aligned with corporate commitments to do this. So government creating this market, identifying food loss and waste as an area which can really become a market opportunity for everyone, from consumers in terms of households, how they can reduce their waste, to corporates and how they can do that, and then ultimately to why this can be invested. The second one is measuring this. So really ensuring a transparency in that value chain, not only within the corporate, but all the way through small, medium enterprises, ideally over time to smallholder farmers, to actually measure this food loss and waste, as was outlined by Richard and Adriana, into something that is tangible, that can be captured to show the waste, but also how it could be a saving and could actually be an asset in the future. But the biggest part is acting. You know, a lot of corporates have committed in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa to these targets, but really now is the time to deliver for these corporates through their entire supply chain, including third parties, to deliver food loss and waste savings on the ground. If we can create that scale, it then becomes something that financial institutions at various levels can invest in to deploy these products to really mainstream this as a solution that is a market-based solution for all. So there you go. Target, measure, act, invest. Over you, Richard. The time to act is now.
Thank you, Ian. And thank you very much for that rallying call at the end, because I think the power of that simple approach, target, getting countries and businesses to actually set targets, institutionalized measurement, and making sure we're really clear about measuring to a consistent standard, which is, as we both know, is actually already, there's a standard available, developed by WRI, RAP, and CGF. So that's possible. And then the acting. And given the run up to COP, that acting is absolutely important, and supported in that acting by the investment. And absolutely great call to action there, Ian. Thank you very much. And can I just ask you all, please, to add your questions into the Q&A box for the panel at the end, and help us all have a really fruitful discussion on next steps on this. Thank you, Ian. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Geeta Sethi to the stage from the World Bank. Geeta is the advisor and global lead for food systems at the World Bank, and a real leader and an advocate for food waste reduction globally. She is the lead architect of the World Bank's food system transformation agenda, a food system that provides the triple bottom line of prosperity, sustainability, and healthy people. She also manages the World Bank's program of food loss and waste reduction, and she has more than 20 years experience working as an economist on fragile, low and middle income countries. Her work has focused on the issues of rural development, service delivery, and intergovernmental fiscal policies around the world. And this is a huge challenge we face in Geeta. So over to you to tell us how the World Bank is helping us tackle food loss and waste.
Richard, what a pleasure and always a privilege to be with you. I want to first start by congratulating RAP for their leadership and really bringing us all together. It's a very interesting topic, tackling the food waste funding gap. We have three crises globally today. We have the health crisis, we have the climate crisis, and we have the ecosystem crisis. And food system squarely sits as a solution to all three. And food loss and waste, as my colleagues have already talked about, is definitely a symptom of a broken food system. Now, before I start into the financing story, I wanted to share one observation. I'm not going to get into data because I think Adriana and Richard pulled that out very clearly and very beautifully. But it is absolutely true that when the deep pockets, whether it's the Wall Streets or it is the big corporates, or it's even ministers of finance, think about decarbonization, food is not yet on their radar. And it is the kinds of report and data and evidence that we are gathering, the kind of momentum we are creating through our global partnerships and forums is critical to get these deep pockets to begin to think of food sector as part of the decarbonization. Energy alone cannot deliver the Paris commitment. Food has to lean in. Having said that, before I get more into the kind of financing packages that I think the world needs, let me lay a groundwork. And in a minute, you'll see where I'm taking this. At the World Bank, with Richard and many other colleagues, we came out with a flagship report on food loss and waste, a global problem with local solutions. One of the reasons we did this is because we really needed to understand what are the economic drivers of losses and waste. And let me quickly tell you three interesting outcomes. We established through the simulations that increase in food prices reduces waste across the entire value chain. Why is this important to financing? It's important to financing because public support to agriculture right now, globally, of close to 700 billion a year is artificially depressing prices and encourages global food production in a way that is contributing to GHGs, global greenhouse gas emissions, through excessive fertilizer use. It also led us to believe, showcase that increasing food prices does have an impact at reducing losses and waste. It's clear, particularly on the household side, but clearly in today's environment, that's not an option. The second insight that I wanted to share with you, again, connecting it to the financing side, is that geographies matter, economies matter, commodity and policy goals matter. We need to understand clearly where the losses are happening across the entire value chain to be able to define the kind of investments that can make a difference. Let me share with you a quick example before I get into the financing more explicitly. We looked at two countries, Nigeria and Rwanda, and we looked at maize as a value chain in both countries. And we saw that if the overall policy goal for a country is to reduce carbon footprint, then it matters where the intervention to reducing losses and waste happens. A 50% reduction in losses and waste at the transportation level in Nigeria reduced the emissions, the global greenhouse gas emissions, by 27%. But in Rwanda, for the same overall global overall development policy goal, the intervention had to happen at the farm level to be able to reduce the emissions by 23%. The reason I bring this up is because I think this is very important, because we know the broad set of solutions, right, across in terms of what needs to happen to address losses and waste. We know we need better infrastructure. We know we need better storage. We know we need to disrupt refrigeration in a very different manner for agro-logistics, et cetera, but just by investing in this may not always have the kind of return that's needed. And it really is important to understand sort of what's happening in different geographies across the different value chains to provide the kind of confidence the private finance needs. Now let me get it into financing. This was just to give you a flavor why I think analytics are very important to convince and bring the right people at the table. Adriana mentioned this already about the NDCs. It is absolutely true. The NDCs are very weak. They're weak in general, but they're also very weak when it comes to grab losses and waste, because the impact to carbon reduction is so clear, and both the reports show that. If the countries, so the first financing, if the countries were clear in their NDC, in their food losses and waste and NDCs, they could get bigger chunk of climate finance. Climate finance could be channeled there. Second, when we think about decarbonization, the capital markets, they're thinking about the energy sector, as I mentioned. For them to come to the food sector, we need to think through very clearly what are the big wind farm equivalent in the food and ag space. For example, disrupting refrigeration, that requires megabucks. It also requires a very different kind of partnership and de-risking. It requires a very balance sheet that is able to handle a higher risk appetite. We need to get this in the DNA of different institutions quickly. Bonds, countries in their natural pathways. I think we've just had an announcement of new SDRs, issuance of 650 billion SDRs issued by IMF, largely for climate vulnerability. The vulnerability assessments are being done as we speak. Could food be explicitly there, in particular losses and waste? Could countries take 1% of those newly issued SDRs and raise funds in the capital markets? Could philanthropists and IFIs come in to help provide the kind of de-risking the capital markets need to get the money in? So I think there are some very interesting examples, including from the energy sector, that can be brought in this sector. And the sector is ripe to really blow big dents into the emission patterns that we have out of losses and waste. There's also development finance available, but countries are not looking and asking for development finance to help augment the climate finance or climate outcomes. Why not? Why can't we package development and climate finance for more vulnerable countries? We can, but the countries have to be at the driver's seat. But I think all of this is possible and can be done with the kind of analytics that has been shown by Adriana and Richard, amongst many more that we will see. But these need to be driven home. This dialogue cannot be, once we get into the food system storyline, because losses and waste is a food systems issue. It's not an agricultural issue. This dialogue in the countries needs to rise to the custodians of finance. It needs for ministers of finance to realize that by repurposing public support, they are able to really capture and provide resources that gives the private sector more comfort, and therefore then changing the direction of capital more into the food sector. So with that, let me stop, Richard, and delighted to be here and happy to be in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Geeta, and thank you very much. There's an awful lot of food for thought in that presentation. Cracky, in 10 minutes, sort of grand vision of how we could change things. And I guess one of the things we're probably going to explore in the Q&A is how some of the ideas that you've just fleshed out, how some of the ways, that wonderful thing is that financiers are thinking, when they're thinking decarbonisation, they're thinking wind farms, they're thinking, energy efficiency. They aren't thinking food. And I guess the question, and your point about de-risking, how do we de-risk it? Because we may only have to do it for 2 or 3 years in order to actually get the people comfortable with this new type of investment. But maybe that's something we can explore in the Q&A when we get to that stage. Thank you very much, Geeta. That was great. Really appreciate that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Rita Schuster from the NAMAR facility. And Rita is an advisor and the Waste and Circular Economy Lead at the Technical Support Unit of the NAMA facility. She joined NAMA in 2018, and in this role, she supports the implementation of NAMA, which stands for Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Action. It's a great acronym, that, by the way, Rita. The NAMA support projects that affect sector-wide shifts towards sustainable, irreversible carbon neutral pathways, and by this contribute to the implementation of the NDCs in developing countries and emerging economies. Rita, really looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. In my short presentation, I will provide a brief overview of what the NAMA facility is, because maybe not all of the members of the audience are familiar with our facility. Then I will provide an overview of our project portfolio, also present briefly the project selection process, and then finally I will share also a few of our lessons related to the waste sector. As an introduction, what is the aim of the NAMA facility? Next slide, please. Thank you. So the NAMA facility's objective is to provide financial support to developing countries and emerging economies in implementing ambitious NAMA. So these are the nationally appropriate mitigation actions, because these NAMAs, they can really function as an important vehicle to implement NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And these actions are then meant to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in relevant sectors and thereby realize a true sustainable transformational change towards a carbon neutral pathway. And then on the next slide, we would have a few facts about the NAMA facility. So basically, the NAMA facility is a multi-donor fund that was jointly established by Germany, the UK, and then later joined by Denmark and the European Commission, and our most recent donor is the Children's Investment. Total funding that has been made available through the NAMA facility since its inception amounts to 684 million euros. And in the 7 previous calls we have run, there were 39 NAMA support projects selected in 31 different countries. And our most recent call, which is labeled as the Ambition Initiative, is this year, and we are now in the final steps of the assessment, basically. Okay, then what exactly would we support? We would see that on the next slide. Thank you. So we do support so-called NAMA support projects. So that's really that would be projects that support the most ambitious part of these NAMAs, and that also have really a potential to catalyze transformational change towards carbon neutral development in the overall sector. One specific aspect which not all other similar institutions basically support is that we would systematically ask for a combination of financial and technical measures that are implemented that really go hand in hand. And then a few key requirements for NSP. So the implementation period of the projects we are looking for should be between 3 and 5.5 years. And requested funding volume from the NAMA facility should be in the range of 5 to 25 million euros. Also interesting to notice that the NAMA facility does not have a regional or sectoral focus. So basically, all sectors and countries are warmly invited to submit applications to the NAMA facility. Then on the key requirements for selection. These would be that, projects have a high implementation readiness, of course, also that they display a high mitigation potential, and that they catalyze transformational change in a given sector. And then this new initiative I already mentioned, the Ambition Initiative. Here we have introduced an additional eligibility criterion, which is basically that the submitter country also has an enhanced and ambitious NDC. And with that, we would have a quick look at the portfolio. So basically, we are currently funding 33 NSPs, which are either in the detailed preparation phase, so in a phase where the project prepares the full-fledged proposal, or in the implementation phase. And the sectors we currently have NSPs in the portfolio is energy efficiency, renewable energy, agriculture and forestry, and transport and waste. And on the next slide, where you see the second part of the portfolio, you can see the waste sector projects at the bottom. And one project I would like to highlight in particular is a project we are supporting in Peru on organic waste management, which also has a waste prevention component. And it is for the moment still at the very beginning of this detailed preparation phase, but yeah, we would be very happy to share lessons from this project once it moves to the next stages. And with that, we would have a look at the NAMO support organizations. So that is basically a partner all our projects need to have in their project concept. These would be qualified legal entities that are endorsed by the national government to really ensure the implementation of an NSP in the country. And the reason why we need to pick these organizations to basically have a link between the national ministry and the NAMO facility is that we cannot directly provide funding to partner government institutions such as a ministry, but the NSO will be the contractual partner of the NAMO facility and will receive basically the funding and then do the implementation together with the national ministries. And the entities that are eligible as NSOs can be national or international organizations, and here you just have a selection of the NAMO support organizations and implementing partners we already have in our portfolio. And then next, I would just like to have a look at the selection process. So basically, the very first step is that the NAMO facility board would decide to avail funding for new NSPs. Then we initiate a selection process for NSPs via a public call for NSP outlines. And these submitted outlines, they will then undergo an initial desktop assessment, and where possible, we would then also do on-site missions for an in-depth assessment for the most ambitious and feasible outlines. And the NSPs that then successfully passed the assessment, they are recommended to the board for funding of the so-called detailed preparation phase, in which the applicant then prepares what I already mentioned earlier on, this detailed proposal. And in this phase, the NSP can, for example, work on conducting baseline and feasibility studies, establish the financial mechanism, verify the estimated mitigation potential. So there is really this phase of 10 to 15 months where a lot of further work can be done on the actual or initial concept to then submit the full-fledged proposal to us. And these proposals, they undergo then an assessment again by the TSU and the external experts. And if this assessment is passed successfully, these projects are recommended to the board, and the board then takes the final decision on providing funding for the implementation of the NSP. And that would then be this phase of 3 to 5.5 years of actual implementation with the full implementation budget requested by the submitter. Then we would have a look at the means of support. I think I've already mentioned this a little bit on previous slides, but just to make this clear again, we do provide funding for NSPs that are based on financial and on a financial and a technical component. And the financial component consists, for example, in the implementation of financial instruments to promote investment. And that could be a whole array of different instruments, be it investment grants, concessional loans, guarantee funds, and so on and so forth. And the technical component could include, for example, work on political framework conditions, knowledge development, capacity development, and so on. And what is important, of course, is then that there is a plausible link and a constant interaction between the financial component and the technical component. And with that, I would move to the lessons. So this is really just a very short selection on lessons I thought would be relevant for this discussion. So these are lessons based on previous submissions we've received at the NAMA facility. So things we have really seen relatively often in the outlines that were handed in. So something we can see in general is that the suggested approaches, they do really have a very high potential for GHG mitigation. Then another strength is that many submissions, they do also have included in their concept a very strong potential for behavioral change. So they're really displaying very comprehensive approaches for, be it implementing source segregation, fostering the mind shift and collaboration of stakeholders in the waste sector, and which is of course very important to for a long-term sustainability of these NSPs. And then one major challenge we see in almost all of these submissions in the sector is that very often the waste hierarchy is actually not at all respected. So we do receive a lot of applications where waste prevention is completely omitted, sometimes also really pure end-of-pipe approaches, which is of course not something we would like to support. So yeah, in short, these submitted approaches are often very not really circular, even though they are labeled as such. But yeah, so just this a pity, but this is just really to display that we would be extremely interested in receiving applications that include food waste reduction, because this is something that we don't really have as such for the moment in our portfolio. But I think there is a lot of potential for supporting this kind of projects through NAMA facility funds. And I think that brings me to my very last slide, because this question might come up. Is basically what are the future possibilities in requesting funding from the NAMA facility. So I can't really make an announcement for the moment, because this is planned for a little bit later, but there will be announcements on future funding opportunities during the COP26 in November. And yeah, with that, that brings me to the end of my short presentation. And thank you for listening. I hope that provided you at least with a short insight into what the NAMA facility is doing and how we could support. And if there are questions to ask, then please, of course, feel free to reach out to us.
And thank you, Rita. That was really excellent. And if I may, I have a quick question now while I've got you, if you don't mind, which is, you mentioned behavior changes. Does that mean that the NAMA facility would entertain proposals that actually focus, for example, on household food waste prevention, as well as doing through the supply chain?
Absolutely, because and also this is something we are already encouraging in submissions we have already received and we are supporting, where sometimes this aspect is actually missing, and then we would encourage it from our side actually to the applicant to include that in an application which is rather supply side focused, so that this aspect is also integrated. So absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you very much. And I know it was really great to get those insights at the end around, what you found in terms of applications, and so little focus on waste prevention. Given the numbers, I find that startling, but nonetheless, that's really interesting. Thank you very much, Rita. And I'll see you again in the Q&A session. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the last speaker of the day, last but certainly by no means least, Patty Fong from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And Patty Fong is the Program Director, Climate and Health and Wellbeing at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a strategic alliance of philanthropic foundations working together and with others to transform global food systems now and for future generations. She brings 2 decades of experience with strategic philanthropy in climate and sustainability. She was formerly Program Director and founding Chief Operating Officer at the European Climate Foundation, the first philanthropic collaboration on climate in Europe. Excellent background, Patty. Over to you for the last presentation. Look forward to your insights.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me as I show some slides. I know it's been a long day for some, or maybe for some of you, it's just beginning. Am I showing the right presenter view?
Perfect.
mode?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So let me start by giving just a bit of a short introduction about the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. We are an alliance of now 31 members, philanthropic organizations working together and with others to transform global food systems. Our members address or come at food systems from a multitude of perspectives. For example, they promote agricultural sciences research, partner with rural women's organizations to create change that benefits families, communities, and regions. They improve access to local, sustainable, nutritious food using collaborative research and knowledge sharing. They address the root causes of climate change. They increase public awareness of issues created by current industrial food system. They protect critical ecosystems, back the stewards of cultural and biological diversity, and expand access to affordable quality healthcare for the underserved. And they come through the Global Alliance because we work really at a global level. And they often work, sometimes global, but many times really they're place-based, working in specific regions or specific sectors. But they know that in order to actually achieve their own mission, their own objectives, we need to see a huge shift in our global food systems. And so that is really our aim, is really to kind of be that bridge across all these different objectives, the different co-benefits, to really advocating for the types of shift that we want to see. And that is really a shift that is towards healthy, equitable, renewable, resilient, and culturally diverse food and agricultural systems that are shaped by people, communities, and their institutions. Earlier this year, we launched 7 interconnected calls to actions, which highlight the critical pathways to food systems transformation, which have been elevated time and again by our members, partners, allies, and those we have collaborated with over the past 8 years. They are: 1, to ensure inclusive participatory approaches to governance as a way to address the structural inequities in food systems. 2, to increase research for the public good that emphasizes the indivisible ecological, health, and social and economic goals. 3, to account for the environmental, social, and health impacts of food systems policies and practices in order to inform better decision-making. 4, to direct public sector finance and fiscal policy toward ecologically beneficial forms of farming, healthy food, and resilient livelihoods and communities. 5, to unlock investment opportunities in sustainable food systems and align private, philanthropic, and multilateral funders with national food system actors, really the topic of this webinar. 6, to create enabling environments where agroecology and regenerative approaches flourish. And finally, to promote nutritious, sustainable, and whole food diets adapted to local ecosystems and social cultural contexts. By addressing all these 7 actions together and collaborating with others, we can also address many of the same root causes of food loss and waste. And I'm just reflecting a bit on what Geeta said in hers, like really, it's about the food system as a whole. We need to address this as a kind of a holistic and integrated approach. And you'll know, as I mentioned in our call to action number 5, where we identify the opportunity to unlock private financial flows, including philanthropic investment. And this can happen, especially considering the foundations that I mainly engage with, when it is aligned with the other action areas, such as, demonstrated leadership on good governance, setting targets on public investment and research, on accounting for these co-benefits, right? We call it true cost accounting, as well as aligning the fiscal policies, for example, agricultural support measures that Geeta had mentioned. All these need to go hand in hand, as well as efforts to support consumer behavior and changes in diets. We work to advance these calls to actions in 3 ways. 1, by forging new insights and strengthening evidence for global systems change. 2, by convening key food systems actors and facilitating meaningful dialogue and strengthening interconnections. And finally, by stimulating local and global action and interaction for transformational change, both within our member organizations and the broader world of philanthropy, as well as with partners and allies at global level. So for example, we've been closely engaged in the recently held UN Food Systems Summit. We're also engaged in the Committee on World Food Security, and now we are focused on connecting the dots between food systems and climate change in the run-up to COP26. As was mentioned before, we are facing a triple planetary crisis, both on climate change and on nature and biodiversity, on human health, and that food systems, especially the kind of the type of food systems that is really driving us, making us ill and driving climate change. These are connecting all these crises, and we need to address the root causes. And therefore, it's important that we actually cut across the siloed discussions, whether it's different parts of the food systems, whether it's agriculture, whether it's waste, whether it's on the climate agenda, they all need to be integrated and they need to come together if we're really going to address these crises holistically. So towards that, and one such opportunity that we identified in terms of connecting these two agendas and supporting an integrated approach through government policies and programs is through the nationally determined contributions, as many have referred to already. We used our 7 calls to actions as a foundational framework to create a tool to help policymakers and advocates identify opportunities for better integration of food systems within the NDCs. And we are currently in the process of applying this framework to the NDCs of 14 countries. This approach also highlights the multiple benefits to not only climate change, but also biodiversity, health, the economy, and society, as well as highlights the diversity of context-specific solutions for food production, distribution, consumption, and waste. Here's just briefly, these are the 14 countries that we are targeting in this first round. We've completed 8, which are the green stars, and the yellow are the ones that we're actually completing now over the coming months. And I'll just share with you some of the emerging insights related to food loss and waste from the first 8 countries that we have assessed. One is, as all of you know, the food loss and waste is frequently overlooked, that most NDCs focus on more the supply side aspects of food systems. For example, Bangladesh does not include food loss and waste in its interim NDC and does not have a food waste strategy in place, despite that 10 million tons of food is wasted annually. And the interviews that we've conducted indicate that the stakeholders there recognize the measures to improve food storage capacity at the local level as a major issue and can contribute to food security and improve livelihoods, with the co-benefit of significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the reasons that this has been overlooked is that actually it goes back to the issue about governance and participation. Who was consulted, who was included in actually developing these climate plans? Well, the farmers weren't. And actually, if they had engaged the farmers, they probably would have realized that actually this issue about storage could contribute to mitigation, but it just wasn't even considered because they had actually thought through the kind of full food system perspective. Another issue is that many countries lack the knowledge and the robust data on food loss and waste. And so this presents itself as a significant challenge for considering food loss and waste in the mitigation strategies. So for example, Colombia excluded food loss and waste from its modeling scenarios because they actually didn't have the data. As a result, their NDC does not include any measures to address food loss and waste. So if you don't measure, as Richard said in the very beginning, then you don't know what you're actually trying to address, right? So you need to have data, you need to measure in order to. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine, buddy.
Okay. My screen just went blank all of a sudden, so I don't know what happened. So I'm glad I'm still connected.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay,
You're
great.
nearly there.
Okay. Thirdly, that filling existing data gaps in countries where information on food loss and waste is packaging missing is an important first step. So as all of you have mentioned, that we need this data, and so it's hard to actually know how to direct financing if we don't know actually where the opportunities are. So that's a real issue. I'll just give an example for the US, where actually they have done this modeling and they have assessed, for example, that if the investments to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030 could have a 5-to-1 return on investment, as well as create 51,000 jobs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and save water. And finally, none of the countries that we have assessed have actually addressed ineffective, inequitable, harmful agricultural subsidies. And this is one of the major drivers of food loss and waste. And this is something that Geeta already mentioned. So I'm really glad to hear her say this and emphasize this as something that's really, it doesn't seem so perhaps intuitive in the beginning, but when you think about from a food systems perspective, what is driving the overproduction, what is driving kind of the practices that is leading to at least food loss on farms, we have to think about actually what are those incentive systems. So I'll just end with this one example, this one case study, which actually has been supported by philanthropy. And that's an initiative, a national nonprofit in the US called ReFed, which is dedicated to ending food loss and waste across the US food system by advancing data-driven solutions. They importantly collaborate with and connect with stakeholders across the food waste ecosystem, such as food businesses, funders, researchers, NGO innovators, capital providers, and government policymakers to identify challenges, trade-offs, and opportunities for collaboration. And through this process, they've developed a food loss and waste roadmap to 2030 that looks at the entire food supply chain and identifies 7 key action areas to help guide the food systems efforts over the next 10 years. They also developed an insights engine, an online hub for data insights, which was developed based off of 50 publicly and privately available data sets, and include a detailed financial impact analysis of more than 40 food waste reduction solutions. And their frameworks have been, and methodologies have been adopted and used by over 20 organizations, including the OECD, APEC, Canada, and many multinational companies. So it just goes to say that food loss and waste, we need the targets in place. We need the intention of plans to collect data, develop policies and measures. And through this process, we can unlock the private and philanthropic and multilateral investments that promote food system transformation more generally and food waste prevention more specifically. So we're going to launch the final reports, final analysis in the first quarter of next year. And in the meantime, we are sharing some of the emerging insights. If you would like to learn more about this work, please feel free to get in touch with me. And back over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. And I wonder if I can, and that was very good. Thank you very much indeed. And can I just then ask the other speakers now to join me we have around 20 minutes now for a Q&A session. And there's lots of Q&As, and please just continue to add your questions to it. And just to say that any questions that we don't manage to answer in the time available, we will answer subsequently and provide that with the recording of this event. Great to see everybody there. So I'm going to start off, I think, by highlighting one of the, well, first of all, just to mention that the Green Climate Fund have also said in their previous session, our sister webinar this morning, that they're also targeting food loss and waste. And actually in the chat, there's some descriptions of projects the Green Climate Fund are also doing, which I thought was very interesting. So thank you, Jessica, for putting that in. But I want to come to the first question which is the case is so compelling. What will it take to really catalyze, accelerate the changes needed by everyone to make it happen? Or perhaps is who the key catalyst, government or companies? And Geeta, I just wonder if I could start off with that with you and then throw it open to the panel, because that was almost at the heart. And you mentioned how we might de-risk the initial investments to try and get people interested in moving away from just tackling climate change through wind farms and thinking more broadly about the food system.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you for an amazing thought leaders and action leaders that you assembled here today. It's been very motivating and inspirational for me personally. And going to your question, unlike what I've ever said to you before, I'm going to say that the change agent here is the private sector, okay? And I will expand that in a minute. I don't think by getting 1 million here, 1 million there is going to have the kind of impacts we need. We need the mega bucks. I mean, if private capital is earmarking 250 billion a year for next 8 years in decarbonization, we need to give them something very big and grab the headlines and get financing to change directions. We need to break that inertia. And 1 million here, 1 million there, no, that's not the game to play right now. But to be able to do that, and I think Patty also laid out this very well along with Adriana and other speakers, we need to be very clear in terms of how to manage the risk here, how to price it and how to mitigate it. At the moment, philanthropists have a much higher risk appetite than even the MDBs. They need to be part of this equation. They need to come in very strongly to be that first layer that then allows others to come in. The government has to come in terms of their providing a non-hostile investment climate. So it's almost a tripartite for these mega investments to happen that really transform the food system and thereby also address losses and waste. And when a few of these mega happen, I feel very confident. And this is not a global, it has to happen either in regions or it has to happen in nations. And once we are able to put some of these exciting pipelines for capital, for this size of capital to get mobilized, structure a deal in terms of layering it with philanthropy, public and development finance and private finance. I think I'm very confident that it would be much easier to, as you correctly say, that the de-risking is only initially, because at the end of the day, the numbers suggest that by addressing losses and waste, we're looking at $4.5 trillion of returns, of opportunities. So things will happen. So that would be my first attempt at your question. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Geeta. And I guess my quick reply would be, and how do we get them to these mega funds interested? How do we get them over the line? Is COP26 part of this? Is the NDCs part of this? What do we need to do?
I think it's a very good question, and I'm going to be very bold and say it here. I don't know about the COP26 because food is everywhere and food is nowhere, right? But I think we start the drumbeat to the COP27, and the way COP26 has made energy, we make food the big agenda for COP27 and do the groundwork with great speed now. That's what I would put on the table.
Great. Thank you, Geeta. I just saw you nodding away, Patty, there. Do you want to just add a couple of comments on that?
I agree. It's a drumbeat. I mean, when we started this process with the NDC assessment, and we originally planning to launch it at COP26, we knew we weren't going to change the NDCs by November. It was really just to kind of shine the spotlight and create that attention, and actually working toward 2025 when the next version is due. So we have this opportunity with the, showing the opportunity NDCs. We also have the opportunity with the Food System Summit and this, even though still voluntary compared to NDCs, encouraging countries to develop these national pathways to transform food systems by 2030. And as global stock take progress every 2 years, whatever that means, but it's also timed well with the UNFCCC stock take process. So we really have to stop working in our own separate silos and really figure out how we join up together. And as Rita says, it's the broader food systems approach, which will have these multiple benefits. And also for us, what we're seeing is, yes, the Paris Agreement, it's the climate as a priority, but for many countries, when they develop their national policies and programs, it's not because of climate per se that's driving the priorities. It's these other political, social priorities, right? And so we need to be able to, where we can, quantify or name it. And show what are those other benefits in terms of health, in terms of the economy, in terms of jobs, you know, in terms of livelihoods, because sometimes those are the numbers, those are the stories that will actually drive action, and climate then is the co-benefit for that.
That's interesting. And if I just move on, just to get some more questions in the time we've got to Ian. Ian, there was a specific question actually for you, which is, given that food loss and waste in developing countries is particularly rooted in post-harvest losses and poor storage of some food items at household levels, what place do we give to the smallholder grower and household consumer in seeking solutions to the challenge of food loss and waste?
I think the first point Adriana made was that's not the case, right? So in developing countries, there's a lot of food waste as well as food loss. I think that what the second point is, the work we're doing at food waste, food loss, I think was mentioned, Patty and others, is this is an integrated approach. We shouldn't bifurcate one against the other. At the core, I think what we're trying to do, whether from the flawless retail tourism end or from the smallholder farmer end, is create transparency in our value chain, right? So that once we understand that, we can know where that loss occurs, where should that income for households go, and where can we take that further? So I think doing a lot of that work on that, the back end and food waste, more where the fork is, I think is really critical here. On the farm end, what we're seeing, and we're involved in P4G, and we were clear in our presentation that we do those part of partnerships, is there's some interesting work we're seeing in some of our partnerships in commodities like coffee, where you want to see how could you reimagine that whole coffee supply chain in a much more transparent way, where the household incomes are clear, where the farm holders can see where that income is. So but there's a link to the food loss and food waste chain here we're talking about, because ultimately those producers and consumers are coming together in that whole chain. That's been the theme here, and we shouldn't keep siloing ourselves in our mentality if we're actually trying to solve this problem.
Yeah, that food system approach, I think, has been an emphasis that's kind of a theme that's come right through this. And I'm just going to come back to the de-risking, because there was a specific question around, would we not need smaller initiatives to act as drivers to the de-risking of these large institutional investors? And I'm wondering, perhaps, Rita, if you would have a stab at that, and then others to chip in after that, just that smaller versus larger.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we, for example, also in our work we do, we have sometimes relatively large budgets for really big, be it energy projects or other. But I think if we go for initiatives that do actually need something very different, we also have quite a lot of flexibility there in terms of like what the budgets are. And I think there are certainly also quite a lot of innovative financial instruments that could then be used to actually first show that something works, and to really de-risk to then foster initial investment. So I think there is certainly possibilities also on our side to see how we can work with this sector and issues.
Richard, may I come in here?
Yeah, yes, of course, please do.
Okay. I think Rita's answer is exactly right, but I just want, and I think everything, let thousand flowers bloom, big, little, we just need money to flow. If the requirements for transforming the sector, the food system, is 300 to 350 billion a year for next 10 years, we do need the big monies to begin to come in. Now, whether the strategy is we let the smaller amounts lay the groundwork, I don't know. We've been trying that for a while. Or do we just go for some of these mega platforms that really need $20 to $30 billion investment? Silvopastoral ecosystems in Colombia, $2,000 a hectare to upgrade it. Huge negative emission returns, right? And 1 million hectares is needed, so that's a $20 billion program here. Could we think big? We need these big deals now to really deliver what's needed for planet within the next decade.
I couldn't agree more. To be honest, Geeta, I couldn't agree more. Those bit, and having, as you say, multiple sources of things is key to building momentum.
Yes.
The only concern is, do we wait so long for the big ones to come that actually 2030 is on our doorstep. So that's perhaps the reason to get both of them going on the same.
Yes.
Excellent. And Adriana, I want to come to you. There's been a lot of discussion in the chat about sort of household food waste and across the supply chain and exactly where it fits in. I'm just wondering, where do you see and what do you think is the importance of tackling household food waste as part of delivering SDG 12.3 and climate change mitigation?
Thanks, Richard. Very important question. And before that, I want to highlight what Geeta says. I mean, we need this big investment. The challenge ahead is huge, and we need, as all of the panelists have said, the system approach, the food system approach. So, and I will add also on how to make sure that this big investment will really reach also the small and medium enterprises and will also benefit farmers or people in the rural area. So, but okay, going to the household, which is also connected to the previous question before, no? Who is responsible? It's easier to say, it's government, so it's the private sector. We all, the change here is a systemic one. We need to make the food system circular where there's no waste. And in this, I think, Richard, you show it perfectly, the measurement in Europe, no? 52% of food waste is in the households. So here is where our responsibilities as citizens, as mother, parents, students, whatever, starts in our initial actions, in the choices we make, how we cook. So that's very important, and that's how also the campaigns we are doing to change behavior is important. The second one is, I want also to highlight a big project we did in Colombia also with restaurants. How can they themselves also change it? I'm very happy to see now in Latin America and West Asia, how chefs are coming in also to give tips, not only to restaurants, but households on how they can cook in reducing food waste. So yeah, I mean, Geeta, the challenge is huge, but sometimes these little actions are also very important. So I would say household behavior change is important. There is a movement now with citizens, with chefs also giving the tips there. And restaurants willing to reduce that, and often looking at where are the incentives for them to change. Or where is infrastructure as a household also, like, okay, I separate my waste. Where is infrastructure to make sure that waste is then transformed into something different and not sent to a landfill? So.
Thank you, Adriana. That's great. And I just want to give everybody a chance now to have a final comment because we have just 3 minutes to go. So I'm going to ask for a 30-second final reflection. And I'm going to start with Geeta and then go to Rita and then Adriana. Geeta, your 30 seconds. Start now.
Thanks a lot, Richard. I just want to make 2 quick final comments. First, just where Adriana left, I think Adriana hit on something that is very, 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 very important on any changes around food systems, which is the children and the school feeding programs and the messaging they get, because they are going to be the change agents. So I think this is incredibly important. My second message is we have the ideas, we have the money, we can make this happen. And that should be a goal we set ourselves for the next 1 year when we meet again, that we have 3 mega platforms already financed. Back to you.
Great, that's what I want to hear. 3 mega platforms, you heard it here first. Rita, over to you. That's great, Geeta, thank you.
Yeah, also just very quickly, I think what is maybe currently the issue in our portfolio is that we don't really have any projects that are really directly related to food waste. And so we very often get the question of like, but is that actually something you would support? And like, how would you finance that? And so I think we need some like first examples to actually demonstrate like how we could work together and how we could provide financing. And I think, of course, these projects, they would then be very different from our typical energy efficiency project or renewable energy. But I think, yeah, we need these examples to actually display, okay, that is feasible and that is possible and we can work together. So I think I would be very much looking forward to even receiving some requests in like how we could put together an application. And yeah, I would be really happy to support with that.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to that. It's a great call. Thank you very much. Adriana, 30 seconds. Over to you.
Wow, 30 seconds. Okay, learned so much from my panelists. So happy to share this. I think it's very important to link the food waste in the big agendas. Geeta said, include it in the NDCs is so important. Connect it also, as we're saying, to the biodiversity and connect it to the health and poverty reduction. So this is the systemic change we see. And the second, I think the good news for me is more and more institutions are making finance available. So we have the opportunity here and time to act. Stop it here.
Right. And Patty, over to you for your 30 seconds.
I would, ditto on what everyone else has said and really, reinforce that. I'll just maybe add something else. Just noticing in the chat, this role of public procurement as something that hasn't really been brought up, but as a source of funding in a way, that there's so much money spent by the public sector, and how do you actually shift that funding, that spending in a way so that's reducing food loss and waste? So just a food for thought. How do we consider that as a source of funding?
Yeah, great. I love that food for thought. Yeah, procurement, practice, and food. That's brilliant, Patty. And finally, Ian, over to you.
I think we are the change. I mean, I think in terms of work, target, measure, act, and invest, that's a structured approach we're doing in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa. Crowd in on that, right? Like, let's have NAMAs, Rita, on that in these countries, working with Patty in these foundations, working with Geeta on World Bank. We're already working with UNEP and RAP. We can be part of that change here, right? And then there's entrepreneurs out there like Lean Path who are actually implementing this. We've got corporate signing up. So we have a model. I'm crowding on the implementation of this, and let's replicate and scale together.
Great, replicate and scale together. That's great. What a wonderful finish. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the speakers, to Geeta Sethi from the World Bank, to Rita Schuster from NAMA, from Adriana from UNEP, Patty Fong from the Global Alliance on Food, and Ian de Cruz from P4G. Thank you so much for just an excellent session. Just to say that the questions we didn't get round to, we will answer, and we'll put that up on our website, and a recording of this will be available very shortly, and we'll email everybody who came around with the recording. And once more, thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.